Hello everyone, I am here at Lynchburg DSS with April Watson and our own Cristy Horsley. They're going to talk to you about school stability. We're going to give a few seconds to let people go ahead and get on, but I'll introduce you. Hello ladies.
Hello. And Tami, maybe we can give them kind of an overview of our topic today. And so April Watson, like Tami said, is with Lynchburg DSS. She is one of the foster care supervisors. And I am Cristy Horsley, and I'm the advocate manager for CASA for Lynchburg and Campbell County. And I just wanted to point out too, so our topic today is about school stability and maintaining school stability for children in foster care. But also around this topic, it is relevant not just for kids in foster care. Children who would fall under the homeless designation are also entitled to some of these protections. We're going to be talking more about kids specifically in foster care, since of course that's the demographic that April works with. But at CASA, some of our children that we work with are in foster care, some are not, some are still in a home placement or with relatives, and they might qualify for some of these protections as well. So just keep that in mind, and we're so excited to have all of you.
Great. So even if people aren't live now, they'll be able to come back later and ask questions and we can field them. So if you want to go ahead and get started on some of your questions. And okay. We have two live with us now. Hi everybody.
Okay, so this is definitely a topic that you and I have talked about before, and also CASA and Lynchburg DSS and the school systems. We've been in conversation about this together. So just kind of laid out for people, what is school stability? What do we even mean when we say that, and why does it matter? Who really cares?
Yeah, when we say school placement stability, we essentially mean one child, one school. The idea is that when a child enters foster care, that they would stay in their same school, the same teacher, same schedule, same friends, that that would be one less loss in their life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, and so let's talk about that for a second. Why does it matter, especially for our kind of high-risk kids that come into foster care, or again, some of our kids that might fall under a homeless designation or be a very transient, lots of moves, high poverty, lots of turnover. Why is it beneficial? Why is it important to maintain school stability for them?
One of the most important reasons is that research shows that children with multiple school placements have statistically grim outcomes in life. I did bring a few statistics that I like to share. More than 1/3 of foster care youth have 5 or more school changes. Youth with 1 fewer placement change per year are twice as likely to graduate high school before leaving care. Foster youth repeat a grade twice as often as their peers, and then only 1.8% of foster care youth will go on to graduate with their bachelor's degree, compared to 24% of the general population. So as you can see, those numbers are awful. They're sad. And a lot of our kids, when they come into foster care, they have behavioral issues or potentially developmental delays. And sometimes, every time they move, they essentially lose a little bit of time. They get behind. And sometimes before school will evaluate a child, they want to have seen them and worked with them for 6 months. So it's important that they stay in the school, because that could potentially delay things like child study, IEPs, 504 plans, things that they might be potentially eligible for that could assist them in helping learning them.
Yeah. And I wanted to highlight too the fact that, so with a lot of our kids, as you said, they may have developmental delays a lot of times, or have needs where they would benefit from an IEP or a 504 plan, but also a lot of our kids maybe don't come to us with those IEPs already in place, because kids who aren't even getting their basic needs met, maybe their parents don't have the skills or the ability to navigate something more high level like an IEP meeting to go through that process. But again, a lot of times they'll end up needing those protections. But a lot of times the schools will have developed these relationships with the kids and all this knowledge, a wealth of relational information about the child, like, oh, okay, his mom has been in and out of prison over the last 5 years, and every time she goes in, we know he's going to have a tough time, and this is how we usually connect with him more in this time. So there's a lot of knowledge that the schools have picked up about the family and about the kids. And plus, too, you mentioned change. So when a kid comes into foster care, we know that everything is going to be different for them. And if there's one thing that we can keep the same, that helps us in data collection so that we can really hone in on what's working well for the child, like what changes have made the difference, what's made the growth.
Absolutely.
So all that is really valuable. And then a last thing that I think is worth touching on, just as a concept in foster care, is we want eventually to be able to return kids to the communities that they come from, right? To the families they come from, even if they can't return home to mom and dad, even though that's always the goal we start out with. We want them to be able to stay connected to their community of origin and also to relatives. So again, the school community and all the relationships like coaches and carpool and neighbors, all of that is a part of that original rich community, and we want to protect those networks and really nurture them.
Absolutely. And one thing I've noticed anytime we have a child come into care, if I've talked to teachers, guidance counselors, calling the schools, they know so much about each child, and so it's just such a critical relationship to maintain. They can tell you more about that child in a couple minutes than it'll take months to learn from, digging through a case file or, reading reports. So it's amazing how invested teachers are in the children, school staff, and how important those relationships are.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And then I did also want to, you mentioned especially too about 1/3 of foster kids may have 5 or more placements. And I just wanted to point out to our audience, if that sounds like, oh my goodness, that must be so extreme, or that's the exception, it's not. I have kids on my caseload, that have had like 3 or more school changes in a year, in one school calendar year. So it's not exceptional at all. So a lot of times if we really come into it with kind of that pre-planning and that expectation that we want to maintain school stability, that goes a long way. Okay, so tell us a little bit, what is the policy around what statutes or what policy exists to protect school stability for foster kids?
There is the Fostering Connections to Success Act of 2008, and it essentially provides policy and then some resources for school placement stability, transportation, and it kind of just outlines everything. The goal is just to improve educational outcomes for kids in foster care. And so that allows us to kind of connect with the schools and determine, okay, it is in this child's best interest to stay in the school. How do we make that happen?
And for those following along, so last night when I reshared the information about the video, I did also post a link to the Fostering Futures PDF. But also, if you're following along and you want to take a glance at the policy while we're talking, just Google fostering, I think it's called Fostering Connections, and it's, or Joint Guidance, VDOE, VDSS, and you can pull it up and look while we're talking. It's about 11 pages long. So, okay, and you're saying that guidance kind of creates the policy, the framework that we operate out of. Okay, got it. So can you tell us a little bit about what is the process? So a child comes into foster care. What's the next step as far as finding out what school they're going to and figuring out what's the school goal?
Yeah, the minute a child comes into care, we start asking questions. Where does this child go to school? How long have they been there? And then a lot of times, if it's still early enough in the day, we'll call the school and just ask about any information, assessments, diagnoses, mental health concerns, just anything at all they can tell us about the child. The next step is trying to find a foster home in their school locality. And even if we can't find one in that same district, if we can just find one inside the city of Lynchburg or even outside with foster parents that are willing to transport those kids in. There are a few schools in Lynchburg that are school choice or schools of innovation, and so, or the middle schools, so they have transportation all throughout the city. So sometimes those are even easier to connect. But we can also provide reimbursement to foster parents for mileage, for transportation. So that's the next step, is finding a foster home that is willing to commit to keeping that school placement for that child. And we've had, recently we've had a lot of success with that. In training, our foster parents know that it's an expectation now that child stay in the school, and that we do everything in our power. There are sometimes exceptions. If there's a large sibling group that we have to place a little bit further away just to ensure that they all stay together, sometimes that will take precedent, or that'll be the priority, because we value sibling relationships too. But yeah, doing whatever we can to try to make that work, whether it's dropping off at a daycare. I've also seen some really cool arrangements where foster parents will work together, and one foster parent will drop off at another foster parent's house that the children already know, and then they transport to school or catch the bus there. So we've really tried to get creative with making it work recently.
Awesome. Yeah, and I wanted to highlight, so you mentioned about as far as, I lost my train of thought. But talking about creative options, as far as, things that are available to help protect that. So, and you mentioned before, when a child is going to a Lynchburg City school, even if their foster home has changed and is outside the bounds of their original school district, a lot of times the transport office will just get creative and send a bus.
Yeah, they'll figure out something, or sometimes the foster parent might be able to drop off at another bus stop on their way to work. One of the first things we do is we send an email out, and it has individuals from Lynchburg City Schools attached, and so they start trying to look at their schedule too, and they talk with transportation to see, hey, is this on a bus route? Can we make this happen, and that kind of thing. So a lot of people trying to collaborate to make it happen.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I guess, so that's what I wanted to kind of highlight. So I think maybe a lot of people have the idea that naturally a child's school placement, where they attend school, would be determined by wherever their physical home address is. If their foster home, is outside the school district now, it's sad, it's a shame, but, well, naturally they're going to attend school in their district. But actually, what you're saying is based on the policy that, no, the idea is the default should be the child stay in their school of origin, and we get creative. There are resources out there to help.
Yeah, the VDOE and the VDSS have come together, and that's the guidance that says, these children can stay in their school, and they have 72 hours to be enrolled, but yes, they can stay in their school. The only thing is, social services is responsible for transportation. Like at Lynchburg City Schools in our area has been very gracious and helpful when they can, but ultimately the I guess financial piece falls on the city of Lynchburg, social services, to figure out how to finance that, and there are ways to reimburse.
And tell us a little bit about that, because so we've talked a little bit about it's pretty easy if a child is still within the bounds of the city of Lynchburg, but what about if a child now is in a foster home in Campbell or Amherst County but still is wanting to come to a school in Lynchburg? How does that funding piece play out? What options are available?
It's essentially the same. We would ask that the foster parent transport them, and we would reimburse them for mileage. And like I said, there have been a couple of situations where the foster parent might drop off at a bus stop or like the Y camp or something like that before school in Lynchburg to make it happen. But essentially, they are still eligible for that reimbursement. They just have to be able to get the child here. And so we have quite a few parents who do that, who might have. We've seen some high schoolers that want to maintain in their schools, so the foster parents, they might live in Campbell County, but they drive them to Lynchburg every day, and then we would reimburse. They would just bill us like monthly mileage, and we'd reimburse.
Awesome. And I think also we have some contacts within the school transport office, and definitely I would encourage, whether you're in Lynchburg City or anywhere, definitely view your school transport office as a resource. You can sometimes call and problem solve with them, get creative about what bus stops would work to drop a child off, but also, is it possible that say Lynchburg City Schools might say, well, we can't pick the child up in Campbell County, but Campbell County, why don't you bring them to X point, and then we'll pick them up and transport them from there, and then Lynchburg, and then DSS would be responsible to, reimburse.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something, it's an option. It's not, and every case is definitely unique and specific, but there have been some cases where things like that have been worked out,
Okay. And then and again, just because, the problem-solving transportation, in my experience, is usually kind of the obstacle that gets in the way. So it's nice to have all these tools in our toolkit. One recommendation you've even suggested before, and this is definitely on a case-by-case basis, and you'd have to get it okayed with your caseworker, but it's also an opportunity to utilize support networks in the child's original community. So I've seen it in a case where, someone that was originally carpooling and transporting the child to school continued to do so, just picking the child up from the foster home and bringing them to school. Or also, if there are appropriate biological family members or neighbors or something, again, it's a very specific case-by-case basis, but it's a great opportunity to maintain your child's connections to their original community, and just talk about that with your DSS worker. Okay. I'm trying to think if I had any other questions.
We have 10 people joining us now.
Yay! Very exciting. And one other thing that I wanted to ask about, it sounds like what you're saying is that a lot of the hard work is being done in those conversations, having them upfront with foster parents, managing expectations, and both in the original training and then when the child is originally placed, like, hey, just letting you know, I know that you're in a different school district, but this is the child's school. Can you commit to continuing to transport?
Yeah, I think that's one of the critical pieces, and that maybe in the past we hadn't done, or we hadn't thought of as much, but we've definitely kind of committed to this now. That ideally these children are going to stay in their schools, if at all possible. We're going to try to make it possible however we can. So yes, typically, we're making those calls for placement. This is the school. This child has a relationship there. We really want to keep them there. Can you do this? And if they say, I'm not sure, then we're saying, we might have to look for some other homes. But a lot of time we are having that buy-in, and our foster parents agree, and they want to help facilitate those relationships as much as possible too. So we've had a lot of luck with that recently. But also sometimes it gets difficult because I think some of the sometimes if it's just not working, then sometimes we at least advocate for a natural school break, like Christmas break. Like, all right, can you at least keep them there till Christmas, and then they start the new school past Christmas? Or if a child is transitioning into adoptive home, they might start the next school year at their new school, which is where they'll remain throughout their academic career. So we try to at least, if we can't keep them there forever, we try to make it at least as natural and as easy as possible on them.
Got it. Yeah. And I wanted to, maybe we'll jump for a second. I want to come back eventually to maybe how, because we have, a variety of people maybe watching, maybe CASA volunteers, maybe social workers, maybe school personnel, and each of these people should have a voice and have the opportunity to have input and contribute to the conversation. And for that matter, also, biological parents, and again, members of the child's original community prior to removal, they should have the opportunity to give input as well. But maybe let's circle back to that, and let's talk about, so if a child does have to change placements, how can we make that as smooth and productive and positive as possible, so it's not just, because again, we kind of talked about how the schools accumulate all this information and data about a child. How do we make sure that that information is getting to the new school?
Yeah, I think some of the, obviously making sure the record's transferred, making sure they're complete, making sure that the new school has access to information from the old school. I think having whoever knows about the child, like if it's a guidance counselor, having them touch base, or if the foster parent can kind of be the person in between sharing that information. I know too, it's important that the new school knows right away, does that child have an IEP? Are they part of a child study meeting? Have any evaluations taken place recently? And then I think too, as I kind of mentioned earlier, making sure like if the child's going to move, make sure it happens at a natural break in the school year, Christmas break, or at the beginning of the next school year, somewhere so they at least get to complete a significant part of that academic year without just not showing up the next day. Because you can imagine, like, just never seeing your friend again, and how painful that can be, and how traumatic that can be to just disappear one day. So, and to prepare to that, work up to that with them, and then and just making sure documents are there from one school to another. Can you think of anything? Did I leave out anything?
No, I think those are all good suggestions. And I guess I'm talking a little bit more maybe to CASA volunteers here, but also I think foster parents and social workers too. So first of all, just acquainting yourself with the information that there is out there, because a lot of times, sometimes it just depends on what's in the school file. Like if there's third-party documents, like from medical records or something like that, I think that those don't get transferred. The school only sends like what they generated.
That's a good point. Yeah, and then too, like if there's day treatment involved, making sure like you get that set up before the child transitions, making sure that a lot of that stuff isn't, especially if there's an IEP in place. I think it's definitely important to prepare even more so, because you want any services to transition immediately with that child. We don't want any wait, because that's when things can kind of fall apart.
Absolutely.
So making sure that it just doesn't happen all of a sudden, that there's a lot of preparation for the move, and that everyone is aware of what's going on with the child.
And what I would suggest too, and again, I mean, this is an advocacy tip for foster parents, for CASA volunteers, for guardian ad litems, for social workers. Once you, again, as to finding out the information, I would say go and physically review the actual school file. It's always a good practice if you can, because you don't know what's there until you go and look at it. So physically review the school file, and then also talk to the personnel at the school, and I always encourage people to talk to the classroom teacher for the child specifically, and then at least talk to guidance or the principal, one of the two, and then if day treatment's involved or if the child has medical issues, maybe talk to the school nurse. So you want to talk to those people and review the school file for both the old school, the school of origin, and the new school too, so that then when you are looking at the school file for the new school, you can say, ooh, no, there should be another piece here, let's make sure we get that. And when you call back, ask specifically for this. And then also at the new school, again, talk to the classroom teacher so that you're getting a snapshot of the child's day-to-day function. And then also talk to guidance and principal so that this child is on somebody's radar. And also, I think it's ideal if you can help facilitate the staff between schools talking to each other, like maybe help the classroom teachers exchange email addresses or phone numbers so that they can talk to each other, or guidance do the same thing. And then I've even had it where a child transitioned to a new school and we were really pushing to get an evaluation for IEP, but the new school needed more data. So what I had the old school do is I had the classroom teachers type up documentation about the child's academic functioning and behavior issues and different things and submit that to the new school for review. So I think that's huge. And then, as far as the IEP, going and making sure that the school does have a physical copy of the IEP, and also that not just guidance knows that the child has an IEP, and it's not just in the file for the child, but the classroom teacher, like the people delivering the services, know that the child has the IEP and that they accurately understand what is called for in the IEP.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important. I think those are all good things. And then I guess as far as, so going back a little bit to the placement around, or the process around school placement. So what is the process if, say, a child comes into foster care, we want to keep the child in that same school? Who do you reach out to? Who do you notify? And who does that? The foster parent, social worker?
When a child first comes into care, we send out an email, and on that email are several individuals from Lynchburg City Schools. And so they, one of them, which is Willis Vanderwerker, who is kind of the liaison for Lynchburg City Schools for fostering connections.
By the way, if you guys don't know Willis, you probably will. If you're working with foster children, you probably will know Willis at some point. He is the head of special ed for Lynchburg City Schools, and he makes himself incredibly available, not just for kids with special ed, but also, any authority questions that we have about, foster kids, or what do I do in this situation? So he's an amazing resource and highly responsive. I'm sure his contact information can be found on the Lynchburg City Schools website, but go ahead.
So in one of which those people, Willis is one of those, and so typically he reaches out to transportation right away, and but anyway, we talk, and in the past, historically, Lynchburg City Schools has always been in agreement with keeping our kids in the classroom, in their classrooms. I think they believe in continuity as we do, and so we've never had a problem with that. But if there are things that need to be worked out, like if a child is out of the zone or whatnot, then we would have a best interest determination meeting to talk about things. Or if there were some concerns that needed to be addressed, that's where we would do that.
Sure. And I guess maybe another question too. So I've had some CASA volunteers who are in roles of school personnel and maybe not within the Lynchburg City School system, who is probably, again, you guys have a great working relationship with Lynchburg City Schools, and they're pretty accustomed, like school administration, to working with foster kids. But maybe private schools might be less familiar with that process. So let's say a child in any school comes into foster care, and maybe they have concerns about the child potentially being moved. Who do they reach out to give input? Who can trigger and ask for a best interest determination meeting?
I think essentially anyone can ask, and I think probably the best person to start with is probably a principal, and then maybe guidance counselor from there, teacher. But I think essentially what we've done is always reach out to the principal. And we kind of go from there.
Okay. And when you say principal, do you mean principal at the school of origin?
I think the school of origin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, and so if you are like a CASA volunteer or foster parent or something like that, then yeah, definitely, making sure that you're communicating your concerns or questions to your social worker, but also going ahead and looping the school into that conversation as well. And then if there's maybe already, is it typical at a best interest determination meeting to have not only the school of origin, do you also loop in the proposed school that this child might change to, so they can be part of the conversation as well? Or
I think you would. I don't know that they're always there, because I think a lot of times the plan is for the child to stay, but I think potentially that is a resource that would be invited.
Okay. And also, is it possible, so our tendency might be when a child comes into foster care to kind of have some strong feelings maybe about the biological parents, but again, we want to make them a part of the process since we want to engage them and help them be the best parent they can. So do they have the opportunity to give input into this as well?
Yes.
Okay.
They should have the opportunity to participate as well.
Okay. And how would that occur? Is their individual foster care worker responsible for looping them in? So how would a parent communicate?
I don't know that guidance specifically lays it out, but I would think that like a worker would notify the parent and make them available, and then that's something too ACASA could also bring up. I mean, I think, but I mean, definitely, I would assume that a worker would take on that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm trying to think, and also I'll try and post it. I couldn't figure out how to post it in the comments, but there is actually a best interest determination form that I guess as part of the guidance that
is it the one with the questions?
Yeah,
and I think it just asks some questions. There's some really good ones on there. How does the child feel about any upcoming moves?
Yeah.
It gives the child a voice, essentially.
And that's a great point, because we've had some older kids who, when asked when they've come into foster care, like I've had kids that wanted to change schools because they've had bullying.
Yeah, or they just wanted a fresh start, like things hadn't been good.
Right.
And so I think in those cases it is important to kind of honor what they want and let them have that new start.
Yeah. Are there other?
There was some. Let's see. There always. I just think there's some good.
I really like that one.
Yeah, describe the child's ties to his or her current school, including significant relationships and involvement in extracurricular activities. And I think that's important too, because every once in a while we've had a child who'd been in school for 2 days, and we're like, well, they don't really, and that wasn't necessarily their home school. It was just kind of like they were in transition. So I think that's important too, because if they aren't tied to that school, and they might potentially be somewhere else for years, sometimes that's just a factor that you might want to consider.
And like extracurricular activities and ties, I think that's a great point too, because again, there can be so many organizations within the school that, like ROTC or Beacon of Hope or Iron
Like
Lives,
Girls in the Run.
that this kid has these amazing relationships with these staff, and they're embedded resources within the school that we might not originally think of. So,
Yeah, and I always ask people too, like, can you remember who your teachers were? I mean, it's important. So can you imagine having so many that you can't remember, or just having big gaps in your memory of schools and placements because there were so many? So, those are really important times for a child.
Good. And does this so if the foster care worker, whoever is calling the school to get this information, do you guys actually fill this form out, and does a copy of this go in the child's file at DSS or school file, or do you kind of use this more as a guide?
It's more as a guide, like a tool, kind of. Yeah, it's just kind of like a tool you talk about, and it's kind of part of. It's basically a discussion.
Okay, got it. Okay, I feel like we've touched on most of the things that I wanted to make sure that we discussed. So, okay, I guess the final question is, like I said at the start of the video, this has been a topic of discussion that we've been having, because we both agree that, I mean, all three entities, CASA, the schools, DSS, we all agree. I mean, school is such a massive part of a child's life.
Absolutely.
We want it to be as positive for them as possible, especially since we know our kiddos are at risk in this area anyway. So what are some things you mentioned, kind of actively working on foster parent training and managing expectations? That's been a piece of it. What other efforts have we been making recently, and any efforts moving forward that...
Yeah. I mean, I know from a DSS perspective, that's kind of like a practice piece we've been working on, and just basically an expectation that all workers know that, like, we keep these school placements, at all costs. We do whatever we can to keep them. So that's been almost just like a shift in thinking over in the past years. You did whatever just was easier, and not because it was easy, but because you wanted your child to, like they're in a new placement. Let's get them in,
Right.
let's get them settled, and let's move on. But we've definitely are just shifting gears, thinking about, okay, this school is critical, and like this is going to stay. So it's basically an expectation now that child stay in that school. And then too, we've recently had a training with a joint training with CASA, and so just educating everybody again, and just and for us, we're talking about it in unit meetings. We're talking about it constantly. That's a part of, like, in staffings. That's a question. All right, what about their school? And then right up front from the get go, placement wise, that's a big focus of where that child is ultimately placed. If foster parents are willing and able, then they're most likely we're probably going to use a foster parent that's able to be more flexible in those ways. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that all sounds good. And I know, too, that you've talked about, I know that you've always been active, kind of one of the point people in recruiting new foster parents for Lynchburg DSS. So I've heard you mention that as a priority, too, making sure that we have local foster families so that, we can maintain children in the original communities that they came from.
Absolutely, yeah. Tiger Gordon is our trainer, and so in training, too, she incorporates a lot of school pieces, and she does a lot of in her trainings talking about how this is critical, and the expectation is that our kids stay there, and just one of her trainings is about grief and loss, and then if this is one less loss we can give those kids, like, let's do it.
Yeah.
If this is the only thing we can give them, let's give it to them. That has become a critical piece in our training.
And I think it is worth mentioning, too, that even though we, when kids come into foster care, our goal is always that we'll minimize the amount of transitions that they have, and we don't want them to hop from home to home. And so often, the homes that we put a child in, as much as possible, it's great if it's foster to adopt, if that's an option on the table. But also, that's not always a possibility. And sometimes kids do change foster homes during a case. So again, with that in mind, if we can protect that school placement so that, again, the child is having some continuous people in their life and continuous data that they can stay connected to, that is all the better. So, absolutely. And Tami, I saw you, did someone have a question or something? Have there been any questions?
There have been no questions, but I'd like to thank the Motherhood Collective and Cristy Stafford for sharing our video, and 10 people have reacted and have been watching, so that's really great.
Good. And Tami, as a CASA volunteer yourself and as a parent in Lynchburg City Schools, are there any other questions that you can think of? Or?
Not at the moment. We did talk about how in certain schools there is a high transient rate already, and so as much stability as we can give any child, I think it's important. And I think, as April said, just having that conversation is key, and that it's in everybody's forefront and they're thinking about it and making sure that happens. Obviously, that isn't always the possibility if they're moved further out, but that it is at least tried to do that. And you said most time lately it's been happening.
I mean, we've seen really good numbers recently. And even we're talking a lot about trauma these days. Everybody in schools and everywhere, and so that is traumatic for a child to leave their school. So that's one less trauma. That's one less.
Absolutely.
Well,
Okay,
I want to
good.
thank everybody for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, April, for doing this with us and educating. And the best part about this is when it exists, and it's a resource for anyone at any time. So thank you both.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to finish it up.